This is a short historical and literary perspective of Mark Twain in relation to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Mark Twain was born November 30, 1835, and he died April 21, 1910. He was raised in Florida and Missouri. He married in 1870. He wrote several short stories, essays, and novels, and toured the country as a speaker. He was very well known during his time and was a very large part of the literary scene of the United States. The novel that first made him famous was Tom Sawyer, which he published in 1876. He followed that 9 years later with The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which is typically considered a sequel because it uses the same characters. Huck Finn is a significant character in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. The novel The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was instantly banned in many areas because people felt that it had abolitionist views. In other words, it was anti-slavery, even though it was published after the end of Civil War. And this actually may have helped its popularity, as we see in the modern day as well. When you're told not to read something or not to see something, many times it's what we want to see. Today it's often censored or banned for what many consider to be its racist language, and it does remain in the top 10 most banned books in the United States. The N-word is used 213 times in the novel. So an interesting twist. The reason it was banned initially is the exact opposite reason why it is banned today. We need to understand a little bit about the Mississippi River because the primary setting of this novel involves the Mississippi. The Mississippi River is approximately 2,320 miles long. It flows at 1.2 miles per hour. It ranges anywhere from 20 feet to 4 miles wide. It ranges anywhere from 3 feet deep to at least 200 feet deep. And in terms of tonnage, the largest port in the world is located in Mississippi. 60% of all grain in the United States is transported on this river to New Orleans for export. And many cities along the Mississippi mentioned in the novel currently cite the book as part of their tourism trade. You can actually travel along the Mississippi on Huck Finn tours. This novel is told in first person by the protagonist, Huck Finn, which means he's using the word I and referring to himself in telling the story. This is the most natural point of view and gives the reader the opportunity to live simultaneously with the narrator. So as the character sees things, so do we. Occasionally you'll also learn about events after they happen, which shows that Twain is trying to give Huck a second perspective, that of a more mature person perhaps looking back. In some cases that might mean hours later, days later, or in some cases you get the feeling that perhaps he is looking back on this as an adult. The advantage of this is subjectivity, which means you get everything the way the narrator gets it. So if he has an instant reaction to something, you see his initial emotional reaction. It's not covered up by a separation between the narrator and the reader. The disadvantage of that, however, is that you'll only get the details that the narrator can remember, and sometimes that may not be completely accurate. It also will give you less suspense because there's nothing held back. So questions that we might want to ask ourselves at this point is, why would Mark Twain choose this point of view? How is this point of view affecting the storyline? And we always want to remember, the author is not the narrator. So Mark Twain's choices are certainly not Huck Finn's choices. However, Mark Twain as the writer is manipulating Huck Finn's choices because he's writing the story. Occasionally in the novel, we have a second person point of view. Huck speaks directly to us, the readers, and he'll refer to us as you. This is a little bit unusual. However, it works well in the story because Huck is appealing to us to help understand his situation that he is in. He struggles through most of the novel with some very strong moral issues, and he wants us to understand, or at least Twain wants us to understand through Huck, that we too may need to struggle through the same or similar moral issues. The novel is broken down into 3 specific sections. The first part is Huck living in civilization in Missouri. The second part of the novel deals with Huck and Jim in the wilderness traveling the Mississippi. And the third is Huck's return to civilization on the Phelpses' farm. The plot is then broken down even further into a series of episodes. We call this episodic writing, and each one has its own climax. Think of it from this standpoint. Every story that occurs in Huck Finn could be pulled out of the novel and be published as its own short story. Mark Twain may have done this for many different reasons. After all, he did publish quite significantly a high number of short stories. So he may have been looking at some of these as individually published aspects. But it does make for interesting reading because you are able to read a certain number of chapters and have your own specific story, each with its own main characters, its own issues, and its own climax. The last aspect is that we do have a framework story. This is where we have a narrative inside a narrative. So think of it with the framework like a picture. You have the frame that surrounds the outside of the story. This frame may start us with a character and a setting, and it may end with the same character and the setting, but inside the actual picture itself tells its own story. So if we go back to the top and look at Huck Finn living in civilization and Huck's return to civilization, there's our frame. Huck and Jim and the experiences they have on the Mississippi become the picture portion of the story. This novel does act as a sequel to Tom Sawyer, and it took Twain at least 7 years to write. He abandoned it, threatened to burn the manuscript, and that's probably why we have some shifts in tone. The beginning is very childlike and lighthearted, very similar, if you've read Tom Sawyer, to the same type of tone Tom Sawyer had. The middle becomes significantly more serious, where we are dealing with the idea that Jim is considered an escaped slave. He is also considered a potential murder suspect. And so we see that the plot becomes much more serious because we have a man's life at stake. At the end, in the Phelpses' farm, it becomes much more lighthearted again, and again you see the similarities to the novel The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. And that may be why this novel appeals to so many age levels. Many films have been made on it. I am going to warn you at this point that there may be a few spoilers, so I apologize. This novel is considered a coming-of-age novel, yet Huck does not fully come of age. There's a point at the end where many critics feel that he becomes subordinate to Tom when Tom appears in the end of the novel, and so it shows that Huck does not fully develop as a mature teen. It's considered a melodrama because of the eavesdropping, disguises, trickery, the pretend murders, the feuds, the character epiphanies. And it's also considered a picaresque. And we've already talked about how this is different episodes that could work as their own stories, but they're blended together into the novel. And that's where we see the detailed episodic story, often with a quest or journey at the center of the plot. Huck is certainly on a quest as he sails down the Mississippi with Jim.